Welcome to Masters of Self University podcast, your highest source of sacred truths and universal wisdom. Hello, beautiful souls. I'm Rachel Fiori, mystic, spiritual teacher, psychic healer, and founder of Masters of Self University. Join our journey of soul transformation as we deep dive into this latest episode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Masters of Self University podcast. I'm your host, Ellie Lee.
And I'm your host, Danny Morley. And today we're going to talk about the only two things that you really need to heal almost anything in your life. And that is willingness and devotion. So we're going to break down what these two words mean and why they are so important in this work and for healing in general. So you're going to understand why. I'm going to give some context later on in the podcast. So just bear with me a few minutes to set the scene. Okay. So about 10 years ago, I was completely closed off to spirituality. I wouldn't say I was an atheist, but I wasn't open spiritually at all. And about 6 years ago, went into the dark night of the soul. Things started to change. I started to open myself up. Why? Because I started to go through an enormous amount of suffering. The programs that I had created and absorbed, been conditioned into, the wounds that I had accumulated led me onto a path of self-destruction. And I ended up in a hole. And in that hole, I had a choice. Do I want to keep self-destructing? Or do I want to start to wake up and open myself to my true nature, the spiritual being that we all are having this human experience? And so for me, what brought me onto this path was what came out of an enormous amount of suffering, of internal depression. And this is the case for many people. This is a lot of people become open and become willing to open themselves and to learn through suffering. And this is kind of like the way the old world works, is you go through an enormous amount of what you don't want to experience so you can then make a choice of what you do want. And this is the case for many spiritual people and many spiritual teachers that have come and gone. They go through an enormous amount of suffering, then they wake up, and then they all begin the process of awakening, right? And I remember, so now 3+ years ago, 3.5 years ago, meeting Rachel after becoming very open to all different spiritual teachings and all different stuff. Through the suffering that I experienced, I became incredibly willing to learn, to grow, to do what it takes to heal. I really wanted to heal because what I was experiencing was so uncomfortable and I hated it. I didn't like what it was I was feeling on a daily basis. I felt like I lost myself. The list goes on. And so I became very willing. And when I started Rachel's work, she said on one of the first introductory videos, the only two things you need in this work to succeed is willingness and devotion. The willingness to open yourself, to learn, to do the work, and the devotion to maintain it. So let's start to unpack why that's important and what it means. So let's first start with willingness, right? Willingness is, if I say I will do the dishes. So Al, we can start with you. We can go back and forth with this. Feel into your body when I say I have to do the dishes. I have to do the dishes. Just what does that feel like, saying inside yourself, I have to do the dishes?
Like constricting and like stressful or like forceful.
Beautiful. And now say within yourself, and listeners, I invite you to do this exact same thing. Do this exercise with us. I will do the dishes. I will do the dishes. I will tidy my room. I will fill in the blank. What does that feel like for you, Ellie?
Powerful.
Powerful. Feel where it's coming from. Let's go back to I have to do the dishes. I have to tidy my room. to do this thing. I have to go to work. I have to.
Yeah, it comes from all this
Right.
like resistance and like just it doesn't feel good.
Right. So when there's the energy of force coming in or control, and this is the old world, right? Is all the powers that were, they use force and control to create all of that, and it creates resistance. When someone, if I say I have to do this, as a part of me that's like, I don't want to. Versus feel now where this comes from. I will tidy my room. I will do the dishes. I will go to work. Feel inside yourself, Elle, where do you feel like that comes from?
Like the center.
Exactly. So will, becoming willing, is part of our divinity. It's the power to choose. It's the power to decide and say, I will do this. And it's coming from a very different place to saying, I have to do this. This is something I have to do. Have to do comes from force. When sometimes through this journey, I find myself saying, I have to go do this thing I have to go heal myself. I have to. That's coming from a place of separation. It's coming from control. I will is when we start to tap into our own internal power. This is our own divinity. This is when we get to choose. If I say I will do the dishes, I'm making the choice. I'm making the choice as a sovereign being. This is what I'm choosing to do. And this is why willingness is the first thing that when we can embody that, this is a step towards our own internal power. When we can say, I'm willing to do what it takes to heal, we are making the active choice. We are stepping into our power to decide. Now, remember what all the teachings say about love is a choice, power is a choice. If we remove the choice, it is not power. And that's what we feel in force. In force, there is zero choice. There is no choice.
Yeah.
You have to do this thing. And there's no power there. We start to disconnect right there. We're disconnecting from ourselves when we force ourselves to do something. And that's not to say sometimes we do have to kind of, okay, create a boundary. This is what we're doing. But if we come from the place of force and control, we're losing our ability to come from power. So as we move through the healing journey and this work, when we are connected to the part of us that is willing to choose to do this work, we come from a very different energy. We're tapping into our power. And so like sitting with this, when Rachel told me willingness and devotion, I'm like, beautiful. I love these two words. And they really sank in. And they hit me real deep. I'm like, wow, willingness and devotion. Because the beautiful thing about just staying with willingness is it doesn't take anything before this moment right now to decide I'm going to become willing. There's no degree that I have to learn. There's no studying of what it means. It's, exactly what it means. It's a willingness. I'm open to make a choice. I'm open to decide something. I'm open to make a new decision, a new life path. I'm open to do this thing. I'm going to use my own. And then we get into the word willpower. Willpower is something that I was working on a lot before starting this work. And that was through cold showers. I was listening to a lot of, what's his name?
Wim Hof.
Wim Hof. And he talks a lot about willpower. And that is the decision, obviously, with cold showers. It was building the willpower to, I'm going to decide to go into this water. Now, I'm not here to advocate for cold showers. I actually prefer hot baths. But I'm going to decide to go into this thing, and it's going to be uncomfortable. And I'm going to sit there, and I'm not going to like it. And in that, there was this like building of my own willpower, which ultimately meant, when it came to doing this work, I was like, yeah, I'm willing to do what it takes. So willingness is this power that we have to choose. So then it leads to devotion, willingness and devotion. So before we get into devotion, let's talk about discipline, right? So discipline is something obviously we hear a lot about, become disciplined. There's a lot of rigidity in discipline, right? So let's just feel into each word here. There's discipline, not necessarily a bad thing. I definitely am working on creating more self-discipline. For me, the word discipline, feeling into that energy, there's a lot of boundaries. There's also a lot of baggage, I think, that's come from it, from the world that we've grown up in.
Yeah.
Of they need disciplining, and this like, oh, they need telling off, they need to be filled wrong, there needs to be a lot more rigidity and structure. And whenever I feel into the word discipline, it feels very hard and cold, and very separate, very like there's a like severed, like there's disconnection. And then a step up from that, we've got commitment. I'm going to make a commitment to do this thing. I'm going to commit myself to do the work. Discipline is like, no matter what happens, I'm doing it no matter what. There's a little bit of force in there for me, the way that I feel it. Then how do you feel? Let's say with discipline, how do you feel about the word discipline, Ellie?
Yeah, there is a lot of if there's a lot of negativity that I associate with that word that comes up for me. But there's also so much beauty in it. When you do talk about self-discipline, like there is so much beauty in having self-discipline. But I think in the patriarchal world that we've been raised in, discipline has a lot of like negative energy attached to it.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And that's obviously because the level of consciousness that we're coming from, right, is so separate that, and I just think there's been so much toxic masculine energy around discipline that we've kind of got lost on what that means. And maybe as we evolve more, we'll, get more in tune with the true meaning behind it. But we can feel the energies. You can feel them in yourself. What the word discipline, and then you've got step up from that. Let's go to commitment. So this is like, I'm gonna commit to doing this thing. I told you, Ellie, we're gonna stay with the easy examples. I told you, Ellie, I'm gonna do the dishes. I committed to you I was gonna do that. I'm gonna do it. Have the self-discipline to say, yes, I'm going to go do that thing. Have the willpower to say, yeah, I'm going to go do that thing because I'm deciding to do it. So there's got this like commitment, like, yes, I'm locked in, I'm going to do it. And then we get to devotion. And just feel, as you say, I am devoted to doing this. Feel the difference between I'm disciplined, I'm committed, I'm devoted. And now feel the difference of where each one of these energies comes from within you. I'm disciplined.
Rigidity.
I'm committed.
Committed is, I do like the energy of committed, but there still is some energies around it that don't feel fully divine, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, commitment is a beautiful thing when we're like, yeah, I'm going to do this. Like that's a part of us that we want to foster, we want to bring online. But when we arrive at devotion, you can feel this is coming from within our heart.
Yeah.
This is something that we've chosen to pour our heart and soul into. Why? Now, in the word devotion, there is giving involved. So it's not just about, oh, I'm doing this thing. I'm giving myself to the thing itself. I'm devoted to this thing. It's you're giving your all of you, not from a place of powerlessness, but you're choosing your own power and you're giving it to this thing. And because it comes from this, you can really feel it, this beautiful place of I'm giving in this devotion. This devotion isn't like I'm taking something or I'm doing this for my own personal selfish benefit. A devotion is there's a relationship there between you and the thing. You know that in me devoting myself to this practice, I'm going to become a better person. The world is going to become a better place by me devoting my heart, my soul, my energy, my time to this thing. And you can feel that in the word itself, which is to me is like absolutely beautiful. Like I devote myself to my own path of healing. And these are words obviously that Rachel uses in all of the activations and everything that she does. And now I see, because I'm realizing, I had these realizations this last week, of why these words are so powerful.
Mm.
Because, I mean, what do you feel, Ellie, when you feel the word "I'm devoted," devotion?
I mean, it just feels very, very enlightened. Like the frequencies that move through it feel very enlightened. And while you were speaking, I was like, oh, the way of selfless service is in the word devotion. And devoted has no arrogancy to it, has no superiority. It's really this: when I'm devoted to me, I'm devoted to you. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. And for me, like when I think about the word devotion, it's not, oh, I have to get everything right perfectly. It
Right.
isn't this, I have to show up at 5 a.m.
Which is
discipline.
discipline. Yeah.
I have to show up at 5 a.m. every day and do this. No, I may miss a day, and that's okay because I'm devoted.
Mm-hmm.
Because what I'm doing is I'm pouring my heart and soul into this thing. And that doesn't mean that it has to be the same every single day, which is like the discipline, right? It doesn't have to be the same. Why? Because I'm devoted. This is coming from my soul. Because there is some days that the most devoted thing that I should do is not do this practice and, do something else, right? Yeah. And so just feeling into these words, willingness, devotion, these are the two things which have carried me through these last 3.5 years. And the reason why they're so important, one, obviously, as we've mentioned, is the place at which they're coming from, right? They're coming from a deep place of our core, our power. They are our own divine power, like our ability to choose, to create will, to stick to something long term, to not just, allow something to fade away. But why it's so beautiful and so important is the old world is, as I mentioned earlier, suffering. We go into suffering and then we become willing. And I've arrived at a place right now where I feel like all of the willingness that was created around the suffering that I was in for the number of years, I'm kind of at that limit right now where I feel like I've healed to a level that has brought me back to kind of like baseline. And it would be really easy right now to just be like, okay, I'm good. I'm good right now. I don't need to keep going. I'm not in suffering anymore. But have I really truly become the most enlightened, most powerful, most divine being I could ever? Absolutely not. I'm a long way from that, right? And obviously that journey never really ends. That's why we're down here, is that the expansion and the evolution and the elevation of our soul. And so to get to that next level, the thing that I actually need to embody is more willingness. Because when we suffer, when we go into enormous amount of suffering, as I mentioned, it can create willingness, the willingness to create change. And once you've arrived at a place where you're no longer suffering, you might choose to kind of stay there and not keep growing and expanding at the same rate. And what I found is I have to constantly come back and be like, am I willing to do the work without the suffering to get to the next level? And this is really important because the old earth, you needed suffering. In the new earth, what we are here at MSU to guide people to is to allow them to actually not need to suffer to go to the next level. That's the point. The point is we can choose to not suffer. We don't have to suffer to awaken. We don't have to suffer to elevate our consciousness. We can choose with our own willpower to become willing and devoted to the path of becoming a being of oneness. And in that choice, we don't need to go through all of the hard lessons. We don't need to go through all of the suffering. We can just simply choose to become willing and devoted to the path. Now, some souls like myself actually needed, because that's what I needed at that time, the suffering to realize and wake up to what it was that I was creating in my life. But the way that the ways of oneness work is if I'm just willing to become them, I don't need to suffer to get to where I would really like to be. And that's the case for everybody. And that's what we're here to bring to the world, is showing that. And that's obviously what Rachel has taught me, is like, we don't need to go through all of these hard times. We don't need to suffer. We can just simply become willing and devoted and elevate our consciousness from there.
And that doesn't mean, I mean, for me too, I was at the end of the end of the end. You know, I had suffered for way too long. I was sick of it. I was done with it. And I knew that I needed to find whatever I needed to find to get me out of the suffering. And I mean, I'm very appreciative of it. It was really difficult to move through, but also I'm at the place where you're at, where yeah, there's a lot of things in the last 3.5 years that I've worked on, that I've elevated into, but I don't want to stop here. Why would I want to stop here? That's like, it's like, it's like you're trying to be an Olympic athlete, and then like you get like halfway through and you're like, yeah, I don't want to go for the gold. It's like, why wouldn't you want to go for the gold if you're already halfway there? And it's so true. You know, I've seen a lot of people walk this path who are get really complacent, or who don't want to go deeper, who don't want to elevate higher, that just go, yeah, I'm okay. I'm going to stop here. And it's like, God, you're doing such a disservice to your soul and the expansion of what you could become. I mean, that's your choice. But yeah, for me too, it's like, why would I stop here? I want to keep going. And it always comes down to that willingness and devotion, 100%.
Right. And then the other thing that we see, especially as coaches in this work, are people that come in and they think they know what this work is.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it comes to actually doing the work, they're not actually willing.
Yeah.
And they just they're not willing to receive the teachings and to actually elevate higher, because they're very comfortable staying where they're at in their current programming. They think they want to heal, but they're not actually willing to do the work. They're not actually devoted enough to their soul yet to become that.
Yeah.
And that is one of the main things. And this is where I wanted to get to with the rest of the podcast, is like, what is it that blocks us from being willing? And for me, like, there's a massive amount of entitlement that I constantly see within myself, and superiority. The superiority, thinking that I know best, the entitlement, it makes me disconnect from that part of me that does become willing. And the more that I heal the programs of superiority, that where I think I know best, it creates another layer of like willingness to be humbled, willingness to receive, willingness to see that I don't know best. I'm just obviously that program as a white male is like obviously massively put in there of
Mm-hmm.
like, oh well, I know best, I'm a man, you know. It's like, no, absolute ridiculousness. We as men should be looking up and honoring the powerful women that are here to lead us to this new earth, get out of that toxic misogynistic programming. And the more that I run those programs, I'm disconnecting myself from the willingness to actually hear.
Yeah, I love that. And I think for me, the willingness, what I run big time is, you know, for you, you had a dark night of the soul much later on in your life. And pretty much leading up to that point, like you were like, I would say that you were pretty happy, you're a happy guy until it really hit. For me, I've lived a life just full of sadness and
Yeah.
depression. So for me, the biggest things that I'm constantly having to work on is wanting to avoid walking the path. So it's all of these, I run really big avoidance and escapism programs. Like, how can I escape from this reality? How can I avoid going further? And those are things that are very apparent to me. I work on it constantly. And yeah, those are the things that block me. And I know that as I keep healing those, as I keep alchemizing those, like, there is this huge deep part of me that knows that I'll never stop. Like, there's no way that I'll ever stop. It's just these programs that want to trick you and try to, you know, make you stay trapped in where you are, and they'll feed you stuff like you've done enough, or you're great now, you don't need to do anymore, or this is it, look at your life, you've done it. And it's like, no, like this is just the starting point of what I could really create.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And while we're talking about you and willingness, it's one of your beautiful divine attributes is the willingness to see and own your stuff. Ellie and I still run programs, of course. We're still working through stuff, and as partners, we have stuff that comes up. We have conflicts that arise, but there's a huge amount of willingness to just go, oh, you're right, I am running a program here. Let me look at it. And having that level of willingness to be like, yeah, let me go and actually look at what's coming up instead of just blaming my partner, or blaming another person or whatever it is, allows ourselves to heal. This is like what I'm talking about, right? It allows that healing to take place and allows you to elevate. And that's something that I've seen in you a lot over all of the years that we've known each other. Is there's an incredible amount of willingness to do the work and to heal. What other I've mentioned entitlement, and this is an energy which is really easy to feel. Obviously, the energy of entitlement, it just takes, right? It doesn't want to listen to anything else. And when I'm in that frequency, I can feel I'm very unwilling to listen or think about anything else. But are there any other energies that you find, any other programs which disconnect you from being willing to look at a certain part of you, or that you've seen within yourself?
Yeah, man. I mean, it's uncomfortable. It is really uncomfortable and difficult to look at the things that you don't want to look at. It's easier to look at the things that are easier to look at, right? And I think that's one thing that I've seen on this path is when you start walking this path, a lot of people unconsciously want to stay the victim, want to stay, everything's always being done to me and I've had a horrible life. And that doesn't mean that you didn't have a horrible life filled with abuse and all these things. But it's the parts of, because you were a victim, what was created out of that? What was created that's in your blind spots. And it's the ones in the blind spots that are always really difficult and uncomfortable to see and to go into. But I'm learning and I'm really owning all of that, because it's so freeing to be able to go, yeah, you know what? I haven't showed up running a lot of entitlement programs, or I've shown up really insecure and I've shown up really judgmental. And so what's that all about? Let's go into that. And so sometimes I think that not wanting to see that could be a huge block. That could be a huge detriment. It's been one on my path where I'm like, don't want to look at that. So then I'll take all these like U-turns and I'll veer over here and I'll curve over there until it's like I'm right back at the same place running the same stuff. So I think that's a big one, I think, for people in general.
And have you found within yourself over the past couple of years, the more that you've healed and the more you've elevated, you've become more or less willing?
Of course, more willing. Of course. Yeah. Yes. More willing to look at because now it feels like, when I'm not a runner, but when like you start running and like for me, like the first like 10 minutes, you're like, I hate this, right? It's always like the beginning where it's the toughest, but then you pick up a stride, it's kind of like that. It's like this path is like that. It's like at first it's like, and then you're going and you're going, you're like, okay, I'm picking up wind, I'm picking up speed, my stamina's there, everything's there. So let's go. So yes, I would say it's more willing. But also the more willing you become, the bigger programs like the avoidance or the escapism will get even louder, because obviously they don't want to die.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And how about, let's talk a little bit about devotion. So obviously we've been doing this podcast for 3 years now.
That's devotion, y'all.
That's devotion. There are days, obviously where we have stuff going on and, we don't want to record. Of course, there's like, we're human, things come up, but the place that we're coming from, obviously there's a commitment that we've made. So here, let's get back. There is a certain level of self-discipline that we have to, pull on to make sure that, podcasts get released every week. So this is why I'm saying, like, those words that we were using earlier, none of them are bad or wrong.
No,
not at all. But I was just bringing that exercise to feel, okay, sometimes I do need discipline. Sometimes I do need commitment. And sometimes, I just feel like the most powerful vibration is that devotion. And this is where Ellie and I come from with this podcast, obviously, and Rachel. I've never met a more willing and devoted person in my life than that being. And this is obviously where we've learned all of this, from. But we have to become devoted, and devoted is coming from this place of, let me open my heart to this thing, for this thing, let me give it my all. Do you feel like you've become more devoted to this path over the past 3 years, or has it gone in waves? I know for me it's like waves.
Yeah, it's waves. It's waves 100%. And I think being back in class, it has sprung up a whole new level of devotion, because I can really feel like my soul going, this is what we came here to become. This is what we came here to become. So it's the fire is lit up, but for sure it's waves. For sure. Yeah.
And the beautiful thing about when you've really decided to devote yourself to something like this is that even when the stuff comes up and I might not feel like doing it today, you do it.
Yeah.
And it's not coming from this place of force, like, I have to do this. I'm doing it because I'm choosing to do this.
Yeah.
I want to do this. I want to do it with my heart and soul, because I know what we're building here is absolutely incredible. And for me, the more that I elevate and move through this process, I'm starting to realize more and more what it is that I've signed up for and what this is. And for me, that just creates more devotion, because I'm like, holy crap, like, this is like more beautiful and more powerful than I've ever realized. And I can feel, obviously, now that, like, more and more why I've been drawn to this work so much. And drawn to Rachel and MSU, because I feel the level of divinity that she comes from, more and more. The more that I elevate, the more I'm able to recognize it and feel it. And this comes to, we perceive reality through our level of consciousness and through our programs. And so the less programs that I've ran, my perception of reality has shifted. I feel like I see things more truthfully now, less through my egoic layers of illusion and delusion, which do get created through these programs, and more as the way of truth. And like seeing what this is and feeling what this is. You had a moment recently, right, when you like had another wave of awakening to what it is that we're building here.
I mean, it always just swipes me off my feet, kind of thing, because it's so deep. As it's nothing egoic, it's nothing like that. I can't even explain what this is, because so many of our souls came here in this lifetime to truly awaken, to truly lift this place out of hell. Something for me when the devotion part comes in is, what a dishonor and disservice to my soul for coming here. Since I was a kid, I could really feel the suffering of this world. I really could. And for me, not being devoted to my path means that I'm consenting to separation consciousness existing.
Yes.
And that weighs heavy on me, because for me, I don't ever want anybody to live in the world that I was raised in. And I know that so many people had it much worse than me, but when I see what humans, nature, sentient beings have undergone in this old earth, I mean, it is horrific. It's horrific. And for me, the devotion comes in there, that I must do what I came here to do, to create a world where none of that cannot exist anymore. And that means that I have to alchemize and elevate out of everything that's kept me anchored in the old world of separation consciousness. And that in itself is walking the path of becoming a being of oneness consciousness. And that is what it drives me. That's what drives me.
Yeah, and as you were talking there, I could feel it more. It was like coming up. The more that I've healed and the more that I've elevated, the devotion piece has just got stronger. The willingness for me fluctuates very much depending on like what's running. But as I open more, I'm like, oh man, like the devotion starts to pour out of me more and more and more. Because as I said, like I realize what this is, and you realize, I think the more that you elevate into oneness consciousness, like to truly like know what that means and understand it, you realize that what I do and what I choose to do and who I choose to be has an impact on every single thing in the universe, especially on this planet. But it has an outward effect. It doesn't matter what you're choosing. This is oneness consciousness. You could be choosing your programs, your wounding, could be devoting yourself to plugging into the third dimensional matrix and, you know, closing yourself off. Or you could be choosing through your own willpower, your own willingness to devote yourself to the path of becoming.
Yeah.
And in that, you affect every single being on the planet, because what I vibrate at also impacts you.
Yes.
And the more of us that choose that path, then we all get to eventually live in harmony, the way of harmony, if everybody chooses it.
Yeah. And, you know, how hypocritical of me to sit here and want safety and harmony for all animals and nature and for children, but I'm not doing any work on myself. Like, I don't like it doesn't mean jack all shit if you sit there and you say, I want the world to be better, but you're not doing anything within. Like, it doesn't. So if I truly am somebody that wants that for the entire world, for this species, for this planet, then that means I got to show up for me. I got to be willing and devoted for me on this path. Because, like you said, you know, all of this stuff, like, oh, one person can't change the world. I just had a client recently who said, like, I can't, there's nothing that I can do. And it's like, it's part of the brainwashing too, of like, there's nothing you could, because you're so little and you're so nothing. And it's like, you are part of Creator herself. And you came here on a mission. And I will do what it takes, even if the programs try, you know, I'll do whatever to do what I'm here to do and to help this planet and help the animals and help children and help nature. And I do that by going in within me.
Yeah. And it that brings up for me like all the hopelessness and powerlessness and helplessness that's in there, which is all programs of victim consciousness, right? The part of me that feels like, oh, there's that, like I'm so insignificant. What's the choices that I make, whether I do this thing or this thing, doesn't affect the world. Like I'm only a drop in the ocean, right? There's so many other billions of people out there. Well, there's no point me doing this one thing to, you know, save this one tree or save this one animal. And it's like, well, if we all think that way, then yes, that's the reality that we're going to create. Versus if we all choose to live a different way, then that's the reality that we're going to take. And it begins with us. Like if we're still waiting for somebody else or something else or a governmental body to be the ones to change things, and we're not choosing to change internally, then we've completely outsourced our power and we're still living in complete separation. So how much suffering do we have to go to get to a place of willingness and devotion? Well, I'm here to tell you none. You can simply choose in this moment right now to become willing and devoted to your own path. You do not need to suffer. You can. And Ellie and I have both been through our own levels of suffering. And this is something that I see a lot with, you know, my own gut. How many mistakes do I have to make, or how many choices do I have to make that are disharmonious in my life before I wake up and realize that what I'm doing is harmful? Or can I just simply in this moment choose to not create harm? When there's a part of me that knows on some level that eating this one thing is going to create disharmony, can I just simply make a better choice, knowing and willing to listen, and I'm devoted to becoming a being of harmony, Can I just make the choice now? And I can. That is a choice that I can choose. Whether or not I'm willing to do it, that is the question that we all have to sit with within ourselves.
Yes. And just to say this too, when you make the choice and you proclaim, I'm willing and devoted to do what I need to do to complete my soul mission, to help raise the frequency of this whole planet, all these things, just because you take a class or you join a program or you make an appointment to go see somebody doesn't mean anything if you're not willing and devoted while you're in that program, while you're in that appointment, while you're doing all that stuff to show up for yourself day in and day out. For example, I've just started seeing a cranial sacral doctor, right? Just because she does a healing session on me, if I'm not continuing and doing what I need to do coupled with that, there I'm not going to get what I want out of it. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, you have to be willing and devoted to doing the work that you need to do to get the results that you really want. Period. End of story. So just taking a class and showing up once a week does not mean you're willing and devoted. It's showing up once a week to a class, and every single day outside of that class, you're showing up for yourself. That's willingness and devotion.
Yep. And just, enrolling as a student with us and showing up, to a class once a week, as Ellie just said, that's not willing and devoted. You're willing to show up as a student. Good job.
Yeah.
Good job. Now become willing and devoted to receive the teaching, do the work, and actually heal, actually transform, actually tap into your own power, because it's that power that changes the earth. It's not just showing up to a class once a week and thinking from my mind that I'm doing it. It's, what programs am I actually running? Am I actually doing the work? Am I actually becoming a being of oneness? Or do I just think that I am? And this comes to, Rachel always says, this is not a passive process.
No.
You don't become a being of oneness. You're not going to arrive at a place of co-creating a world of harmony and the new earth by simply just expecting it to happen. We all must become willing and devoted to become that in which we seek. We have to do the work. The old age, I was just listening to a very, very, very well-known spiritual podcast. And the host on there, he was talking about being, states of being. And he was actually saying, oh, we live in a toxic world where everything has become, and it's actually, you just have to be. And there is truth in that. There is elements of truth, of like just being in that vibration, the way of presence, being in being, just centered and grounded in our own internal being and living life from that place.
Yeah.
But the old spiritual world uses that and the spiritual matrix for you to stay completely passive. And this isn't what Rachel teaches. To just stay in the state of being is being disconnected from your own power to create change.
And it's bypassing.
It's bypassing. There is some instances, and Rachel talks about this all the time, where being in the state of being and presence is exactly the most divine thing to do.
The way of presence, yes.
Right. But to live 100% of the time from that place is being a bystander to the becoming of a new earth. It's not going to happen by simply just being and thinking. It's you're disconnecting from your power as the creator. We are the creators. We have to create this. And to create this, we have to be willing and devoted to actually do the work that's necessary to raise our vibration on an inner level and become what we really want to see in the world. I know if you're listening to this podcast, you share this same desire and mission that you want to see harmony and peace for all. You want to see this incredible new earth be created. It is not a passive process. We have to become willing and devoted to our own path. We have to do the work on an energetic level to become these vibrational frequencies and set ourselves free. If we don't, we are anchoring into the old world and we are part of the problem.
Mic drop. That's it. That's it. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to be a part of the problem anymore. I don't want to see at all what I was raised in. And I don't want to feel any of that. And I don't want to be in suffering anymore. You know, we didn't come here to suffer. We come to this planet to experience being human beings and having emotions and all these beautiful things. Like, I have been ripped away from what this human experience has been for all of my life because I was so trapped in suffering. Right. And now I know that from here on out to the latter part of my life, I will actually get to experience what it means to be a human being that is not trapped in suffering. And every time I quantum jump, it is always to a reality where I am physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually free. And I have not been free for all of my life. And now this is the time, you know, for so many of us to really become what we really are, which is freedom, you know, which is everything that is divine. So with that being said, for everybody out there, if you are someone that's listened to this podcast that goes, yeah, I am willing and I am devoted and I'm ready to do this, that's what we're here for. Masters of Self University, our summer semester kicks off May 6th. We will do student enrollment meetings in April, so please register at our website to get first access to those. And thank you so much, Danny, for this beautiful, beautiful podcast episode. And to everybody out there, we will see you on the path of becoming.